There comes a moment in your life when the noise becomes unbearable. The opinions, the betrayals, the people who smile in your face but sharpen their knives behind your back. And in that moment, you feel your soul scream for peace. Not revenge, not answers, just peace. And that, right there, is when you begin to understand the power of silence. See, silence is not weakness. It's not surrender. It's not giving up. Silence is discipline. It is emotional intelligence. It is strength dressed in stillness. Because when you stop reacting, when you stop explaining yourself to people who never cared to understand you in the first place, that's when your power begins to rise. You don't need to fight every battle. You don't need to respond to every insult. You don't need to justify why you chose peace over chaos. Let them wonder why you're so calm. Let them talk. Let them assume. Because silence will protect your dignity when words won't. And when you learn to emotionally detach from what is toxic, when you no longer give your energy to what drains you, you reclaim yourself, your worth, your peace. And that is power. People think detachment means you've stopped caring. They think you've grown cold, distant, heartless. But what they don't understand is that sometimes you have to pull away, not because you feel nothing, but because you've felt too much. You've given so much of your heart that now you're bleeding in silence. Detachment is not about shutting down. It's about survival. It's about reclaiming the pieces of yourself that you've handed out to people who didn't value them. But it's about recognizing that some connections are not nurturing, they're draining. And you reach a point where you say, I can't keep sacrificing my peace for people who don't know how to handle my soul. That's not coldness. That's healing. That's self-preservation. You detach because you've realized that being emotionally available to everyone is what led you to emotional exhaustion. You detach because your spirit needs silence to recover, to rebuild, to breathe again. So don't let the world shame you into believing that stepping back means you're broken. Sometimes it means you're finally becoming whole. When you begin to detach, it feels unfamiliar, almost wrong, because you've been taught to keep holding on. You've been told that love means enduring every storm, even the ones that are tearing you apart. So when you start choosing distance over drama, silence over shouting, boundaries over pleasing, you question yourself. Am I giving up too soon? But what if I told you this? What if you're not giving up? You're growing up. Because emotional detachment doesn't mean you don't feel. It means you've learned to stop drowning in other people's chaos. It means you've realized that saving someone else doesn't require you to lose yourself. And when you finally pull back and take that breath, that deep, quiet breath, you start hearing something you've ignored for far too long, your own voice, that whisper in your soul that says, you deserve peace too. You deserve to rest. That's what detachment gives you. It's not cruelty, it's clarity. It's the sacred space where healing begins and drama ends. Detachment allows you to separate what's yours from what isn't. All your life, you've carried burdens that didn't belong to you. You've shouldered guilt for other people's choices. You've made excuses for behavior that disrespected you. You've convinced yourself that if you just tried harder, gave more, stayed longer, they would change. But they didn't. And you ended up exhausted, broken, empty. That's when detachment walks in. Not as a punishment, but as a lifeline. It says, let it go. It says, you are not responsible for healing people who refuse to acknowledge their wounds. It teaches you to stop answering calls that only come when someone needs something. It teaches you that your value isn't measured by how much pain you can tolerate. And when you finally drop what was never yours to carry, you stand taller. You feel lighter. You begin to move differently, not because you stopped loving, but because you started loving yourself enough to stop bleeding for people who never offered you a hand to hold. And the thing is, the world won't understand. They'll call you distant. They'll say you've changed. They'll try to guilt you back into the role you used to play. The fixer, the listener, the one who never says no. They'll miss the version of you that tolerated disrespect in the name of love. But that version of you wasn't at peace. That version cried behind closed doors. That version sacrificed sleep, joy, energy, just to keep others comfortable. So yes, you've changed. You had to. Because silence taught you what chaos tried to hide, that you matter. Your needs matter, your boundaries matter, and while people may not clap for your healing, your soul will. Your soul will feel the shift when you stop over-explaining and start simply walking away. Your soul will rise every time you choose calm over conflict. That is the quiet victory detachment brings. The kind that doesn't need applause, just peace. When you emotionally detach, you stop living on the edge of other people's moods. You stop walking on eggshells trying to keep the peace in environments that were never peaceful to begin with. You stop tying your self-worth to someone else's approval. You begin to recognize that their inability to see your value doesn't make you worthless, it makes them blind. And as you pull away, you start to reclaim something sacred. Your power. You realize that being unavailable to chaos is not arrogance, it's alignment. It's choosing not to be controlled by guilt or manipulation. It's understanding that love without respect is not love at all. So you stop chasing, stop begging, stop explaining yourself. You become less reactive, more observant. You learn to sit with your emotions without letting them run your life. That's the gift of detachment. It gives you back the reins. It puts you in control of your emotional climate, no longer held hostage by the storms of others. You begin to see that healing isn't loud, it's not dramatic, it's quiet. It's in the small decisions, saying no without guilt, walking away without fanfare, protecting your peace without needing permission. It's in how you respond or don't, how you guard your time, your energy, your heart. Healing looks like detachment because you're no longer forcing what isn't flowing. You're no longer pouring into people who only show up with empty cups. And while part of you may miss the chaos, because chaos feels familiar when you've lived in it long enough, the deeper part of you craves calm, craves order, craves love that doesn't hurt. And when you choose detachment, that's what you're really choosing, a love for yourself so deep, so sacred, that you no longer tolerate anything less than peace. That's not indifference. That's healing in motion. That's self-love in action. And maybe you're doing it in silence. No long posts, no dramatic exits, no final speeches, just slow, intentional steps away from what no longer feels safe to your soul. That's how healing works. Quiet, gentle, strong. And while people may never understand your silence, your emotional distance, your unavailability, that's okay. Let them misunderstand. Let them label it however they want. You don't owe anyone an explanation for your growth because you didn't detach to prove a point. You detached to protect your peace. You detached because your spirit was tired of being in rooms where you had to shrink to be accepted. You detached because you finally realized that sometimes silence is louder than words. Sometimes walking away is louder than screaming. And sometimes not reacting is the most powerful response you can give. That's the beauty of emotional detachment. It's the quiet revolution that says, I choose me now. And that choice changes everything. There's a reason silence feels uncomfortable at first. We've been conditioned to fill every empty space with noise, defending ourselves, proving our worth, reacting to every word that cuts, every look that questions our value. But silence is where your real strength begins to take root. It's where you start to realize that not every attack deserves a counterattack. Not every insult needs an answer. Not every accusation deserves your energy. When you choose silence, you're not surrendering. You're simply telling the world, I no longer perform for your chaos. You're rising above it. Because the one who's truly wise knows that peace is not found in the noise. It's found in the stillness. Silence is what allows you to hear what the world tries to drown out, your instincts, your intuition, your truth. And when you learn to be still, you start to move with power. You speak less, but your presence says more. You react less, but your silence shakes the room. Because silence doesn't make you invisible, it makes you undeniable. In silence, you begin to think clearer. You stop acting from a place of panic, of pain, of needing to prove yourself. You start acting from a place of purpose. When you're silent, you give yourself the gift of time. time to understand what you're feeling, what's really happening, and how to respond in a way that doesn't cost you your peace. See, wisdom isn't born in shouting matches or emotional explosions. Wisdom is forged in the moment you could have spoken but chose not to, not because you were afraid, but because you were focused. Focused on your goals, focused on your growth, focused on not letting small people pull you into small fights. When you're quiet, you start to see who talks just to be loud and who speaks with purpose. And you begin to separate yourself from the noise, not because you're better, but because you're becoming wiser. You understand that energy is currency, and you're done spending yours on nonsense. Silence teaches you to sit with your emotions without letting them drive the car. It helps you realize that you don't have to chase every argument or clarify every misunderstanding. If someone wants to misunderstand you, they will, no matter how loud you scream. But in silence, you no longer feed their narrative. You don't hand them your emotions like a gift they never earned. And in that stillness, you learn to breathe through the discomfort. You learn that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is say nothing, not because you don't care, but because you care too much about protecting your growth. Silence builds emotional muscles that noise never could. It sharpens your ability to observe, to reflect, to discern. And when the world tries to provoke you into reaction, you smile, because you know better now. You don't operate from emotion. You move with intention. You're not about to waste words, proving to people who already decided to misunderstand you. There's a difference between silence and suppression. Suppression is when you silence your truth to make others comfortable. But the silence I'm talking about, it's the kind that brings you back home to yourself. It's where you start listening to the voice within that got drowned out by the opinions of others. In silence, you hear the pain you buried, the dreams you delayed, the strength you forgot you had. You start asking the real questions. What do I need? What am I tolerating that's draining me? Who am I trying to please and why? And the answers that come in that silence, they're the kind that change lives. That's why people fear silence. It forces them to confront the truth. It strips away distractions and exposes what we've been running from. But for those who are brave enough to stay in the silence, there's wisdom waiting, healing waiting, clarity waiting. The silence becomes your sanctuary, not because it's empty, but because it's honest. You don't need to announce everything. You don't have to explain every decision, justify every boundary, or broadcast every emotion. Your silence is not a void. It's a statement. It says, I am no longer entertaining what doesn't nourish me. And when you reach that level of peace, you become untouchable. People will try to provoke you. They'll try to pull you back into old arguments, old versions of yourself. But the you who mastered silence no longer responds from ego. You move with purpose, with peace. And that kind of silence speaks volumes. It makes people wonder what you're thinking, how you're moving, what you know that they don't. And the truth is, you know yourself now. You've done the work. You've sat in the silence and come out stronger. So while others waste time trying to be loud, you spend your energy being wise. And wisdom is what builds legacy. It's what protects your peace when the world wants war. There will be moments when your silence is misunderstood. When people call it avoidance, pride, or emotional distance, let them believe what they want. Your healing is not their business. Your growth is not their gossip. You don't owe anyone access to your inner world just because they demand it. Silence creates a line between you and the world's noise. And in that separation, you find your rhythm. You walk lighter. You think deeper. You rise higher. You stop looking for validation and start trusting your own voice. And as you move in silence, you begin to attract different battles, not petty ones, but purpose-driven ones. You begin to walk into rooms with the presence that doesn't have to be announced. You don't talk to be heard. You speak to be understood. And that shift, That's when the game changes. That's when you stop surviving and start leading. All because you had the courage to be quiet long enough to hear yourself. So if you're in a season of silence, don't rush out of it. Don't let the world's noise rush your healing or your clarity. Stay there until you're centered again. Stay until you know your next move comes from wisdom, not from wounds. Silence isn't weakness. It's a pause before the breakthrough. It's the moment before the arrow is released. It's the stillness that tells the storm, you don't move me anymore. So be silent. Be still. And when the time comes to speak, speak with the fire of someone who knows exactly who they are and exactly what they're here to do. Because when wisdom walks in, it doesn't shout. It doesn't fight. It doesn't demand. It just is. That's the kind of presence silence gives birth to. And that right there is what makes you unstoppable. There's a moment in every life where the real battle begins, not with the world, not with your enemies, not with circumstances, but with yourself, your emotions. That tidal wave of reaction, pain, ego, and fear that wants to control every decision you make. But freedom doesn't come when the storm stops. Freedom comes when you learn how to stand calm in the middle of that storm. Emotional control isn't about being numb emotion. It's about being powerful. It's about knowing you could react, yell, cry, lash out, but you choose not to. Because you finally realize that your peace is too expensive to sacrifice for a moment of weakness. That's when everything starts to shift. When you realize that the person who has the ability to pause, breathe, and choose their response is the person who cannot be controlled by anyone. That's real power. That's real freedom. That's when you stop being a puppet to life and start being the author of it. The loudest one in the room isn't the strongest, the calmest one is. And calm doesn't mean you're soft. It means you're solid. It means you built from something the world didn't give you, and therefore it cannot take away. You see, emotional control isn't about denying what you feel. You're human. You will feel pain. You will feel anger. You will feel hurt. But the difference lies in how you handle it. Do you let it own you? Or do you face it, acknowledge it, and choose to rise above it? That's the true test. Not how loud you can scream, not how hard you hit back, but how still you can remain when everything in you wants to explode. Because that stillness, that's not silence, it's strategy. It's you protecting your future from being destroyed by a temporary emotion. It's you understanding that one reckless word, one impulsive decision, one reaction rooted in pain can cost you years of progress. And you're not about to let that happen anymore. You've come too far. You fought too hard. So now you master your reactions, not for them, but for you. Because the moment you stop letting other people's behavior dictate your inner peace is the moment you step into a level of freedom most never taste. Some people think emotional control means weakness, like you're avoiding confrontation or suppressing your truth. No, not at all. It means you're finally wise enough to know not every situation deserves a reaction. Not every insult needs a response. Not every person deserves access to your energy. You start to realize that giving your emotions to people who haven't earned them is like handing over the keys to your peace and asking them to crash it. And you're done doing that. You're done letting your mood be a puppet to other people's behavior. You're done giving temporary people the power to create permanent damage. So now when the fire rises inside you, you breathe, you pause, you think, and you remind yourself freedom isn't found in revenge. It's found in restraint. That's where real warriors live, not in chaos, in calm, not in rage, in discipline. And it's that discipline that separates the lost from the leaders, the reactive from the resilient, the broken from the unstoppable. It's easy to react. Anyone can explode. Anyone can break down and say things they'll regret. But it takes strength to hold back. It takes character to choose your peace over your pride. That's not weakness. That's growth. And once you taste the power of emotional control, you'll never go back to living without it. You'll stop needing to have the last words. You'll stop needing people to understand your pain in order to validate it, because now you understand it. And that's enough. You'll walk away from arguments, not because you couldn't win, but because you finally understand what's worth your energy and what isn't. You'll stop begging for closure because your peace no longer depends on someone else's explanation. That's freedom. When your emotions no longer hijack your life, you start making decisions from a place of power, not pain. You start building instead of breaking. And that quiet strength, that unshakable control, that becomes your armor. Not the kind that hides your heart, but the kind that protects it. You start noticing things about yourself when you master emotional control. You listen more. You understand deeper. You recognize triggers before they explode. You create space between stimulus and response, and in that space you choose differently. You realize that pain doesn't make the decisions anymore. Purpose does. You stop carrying other people's chaos like it's your burden to hold. You stop being the emotional sponge that soaks up every negative vibe thrown your way. You start becoming the thermostat, not the thermometer. You don't just reflect the room's temperature, you set it. That's when people begin to notice the change in you. They see the peace, the calm, the focus, and they either respect it or get uncomfortable by it. But either way, it doesn't matter to you. Because now, your freedom doesn't come from how others treat you, it comes from how you treat yourself. And nothing is more liberating than realizing your emotional world belongs to you now, not to the wounds of your past or the whims of other people. Think about how many times in your life you let a temporary feeling ruin something permanent. A relationship, an opportunity, a day, an entire season of your life. That's what lack of control does. It steals your future in the name of defending your past. But not anymore. Because now you're building something. A life you don't need to escape from. A version of yourself you're proud of. And you don't get there by letting your emotions run wild. You get there by standing in the fire and not letting it burn your values. You get there by having a conversation with your anger and saying, not today. You don't drive anymore. That's the work. That's the growth. And that's what most people avoid because it's not easy. But you're different. You're not here to be average. You're here to be free. And freedom is earned through emotional discipline. It's built in the moments when you choose wisdom over impulse, peace over panic, love over retaliation. So when life tests you, and it will, remember this, the power is always in your hands. Not in what happens, but in how you choose to respond. Emotional control isn't about being robotic. It's about being rooted. It's about knowing who you are so deeply that nothing outside of you can shake the foundation inside of you. You become the calm in the chaos, the eye in the storm. And while the world may try to pull you into drama, you rise above it, not because you're arrogant, but because you're focused. Focused on your freedom. Focused on your healing. Focused on building a life where your emotions serve you, not sabotage you. That's the kind of power no one can steal from you. That's the kind of strength that can't be shaken. Because once you master your emotions, you master your life. And the world doesn't know what to do with a person who can no longer be controlled by chaos. Now let's bring it home. Everything you've heard, every word, every truth, every fire lit inside you comes down to one powerful choice. To no longer be ruled by your emotions, but to rise above them. You've been through storms that tried to break you, pain that tried to define you, and voices that tried to shake your peace. But you're still here. And now you're learning the most powerful truth of all, that real strength isn't loud, it's steady. It's not in the explosion, but in the stillness after. That emotional control you're building is not denial, it's direction. You're not shutting yourself off. You're stepping into a version of yourself that can no longer be manipulated, triggered, or controlled by chaos. Because silence isn't weakness, detachment isn't indifference, and self-mastery isn't cold-hearted. They are all parts of your healing, your elevation, your freedom. You're protecting your peace, not because you don't care, but because you care so deeply about your growth, your purpose, your future. The world doesn't need more people who can shout. It needs more people who can lead, who can heal, who can pause, think, and choose power over pain. You are becoming that person. Not overnight, not easily, but unshakably. Thank you for listening. Stay grounded, stay powerful, stay free. God bless you.